Morning, everybody. Happy Monday. Happy snowy day. Hopefully nobody got hit too badly. So this morning, we are going to be talking a very little bit about copyright and copyright in the system. So basically, this is going to include copyright, use statement, and right statements, because they're all very much related, but very similar. And all applicable for different reasons. So one of the reasons is driving this is because of our connection with working with the Connecticut Digital Archive. Pretty much from the beginning, Connecticut Digital Archive wanted to institute some policies on copyright because publishing things to the web, and they were going to be the aggregator of a lot of items. So they wanted to make sure that they were being responsible and making sure that things were being planned properly for getting stuff up on the web and not violating any copyright and that kind of thing. And that's something that we've also, through a couple projects, tried to make sure that people are aware of and follow copyright. Little side note, copyright can be extremely, extremely complicated. Sometimes it's very straightforward. A lot of the time it can be very complicated. What's in copyright, what's not in copyright, what of your material is in copyright? Can it be under your copyright, even if you own it, but it's not necessarily the thing? There's a lot of questions that this comes up with, and I am not going to answer a lot of those when it gets down to the detail of that. I've been speaking with Mike Kamisis at Connecticut Humanities, and he's been, when he was working with CTDA, had been doing a lot of work with that for them, and is looking to forward that along with Connecticut Humanities as well, and do some programming for folks on copyright and all that. Go here. Now we can just go to this one for now. Oh, try to do that. So you should just be seeing my CTDA page, I think. So if you're not familiar with CTDA, go ahead and take a peek on and look at it. As most of you know, we do offer the ability to, when you go public on our public portal, you are also can go public on the CTDA as well. Even if you're not in the public portal, you still will have the ability to have your media files, your digital media, uploaded to the CTDA for preservation purposes. If you're choosing not to make those public, you do not have to make those public even on CTDA. We've been working into our connector the ability for all your materials to be hidden. So the digital media files will be preserved, but just not on the public facing portion of this if you don't want it to be. This is unusual and something that they did for us because they are very pro getting the digital media out there and sharing with everybody. But I know there's a lot of reasons why some of us may not want to share those records. So one thing that they require, there's a very interesting page with, if you go on here, and I'll send everybody links when I send them the link to this. There's an about the CTDA, which talks more about it, talks about the connection, preservation, also the sharing. So they are a hub for the Digital Public Library of America as well. So the way the Digital Public Library of America works is that they are another aggregator for all of these other projects. So there's basically each state has a hub that uploads to the Digital Public Library. So CTDA is the hub for Connecticut, and then it pushes everything up forward to that. So your materials are available not just in a Connecticut grouping, but in a national grouping. Again, if you choose them to be. So this kind of continued on the need for having a copyright statement, a right statement, that kind of thing. as you keep going through CTDA, they have some great references on all of the stuff that they've put together. And what they did was work through rightstatements.org. So this is the Connecticut Digital Archive Right Statements page in the resource guide here. I'm not going to go through all of it. It's great reference material for you guys to look through. And it talks about an introduction to right statements, how the CTDA chose to implement this. Even though I said I'm not going through the whole page, I'll go through a couple of things. So there's many different ways to state rights to something, including saying that something is in copyright. So us saying that it's in our copyright or it's in this copyright is a little bit different, and just putting a copyright little C statement is up a little different than saying that something is in copyright or that something is, we think there's a rights holder, we don't know who it is, so we're going to identify that as an unknown rights holder. Copyright does have an expiration term, so I want to say actually, I shouldn't say a date because I'm not sure, but I want to say it's anything before 1927 can be considered not in copyright, unless there's a specific copyright holder that's renewed it over the years. And this is where it gets all crazy and difficult and beyond my pay grade. So anything published before 1927 is generally fair game. Any photographs from like the 1880s, that kind of thing, usually you're fine. Any photographs after that, then you might be getting into issues. So these are some of the statements that CTDA has chosen to use. They require a statement from any records that are uploaded and ingested into the CTDA. So you must have a statement of some sort. You have a choice of these: copyright, unnamed copyright holder, no copyright in the US, no known copyright, copyright undetermined, or public domain. Generally, if people don't know the copyright status of their materials and they haven't gone and haven't been able to track it down or do the work, which is a lot of us because we don't have time for that all the time, copyright undetermined is very often the go-to choice for this, because it just means we haven't gone through and determined if there's a copyright on this or not yet. It's up to the person that wants to use the item to track down to see if there's a copyright. We have, let me go to our sandbox for a second. I'm just going to go to a random thing. I'm just going to an object just for the part of going to the record. So there is a copyright field in collective access in our instance. It's under provenance and rights. Provenance, where you can track your history of the object, the ownerships, and there's a whole rights block down here. Rights and restrictions, rights holder, copyright statement, notes. This block is what's going to change and be updated a little bit. So right now the copyright statement is a free text field. So rather than keeping that specifically as a free text field, we're going to add another drop-down list with choices that are going to match what Connecticut Digital Archive is doing. So you can say a copyright statement if you know that something's in copyright, it's copyright of, John Warner Barber, you can state that and that's fine. In cases where you don't know, you'll have that, or not when you don't know, but you'll be able to add in that drop down of one of the right statement choices from CTDA. So when these records go up to CTDA, especially if you've chosen to make them public, it'll seamlessly link to into what the CTDA requires. The CT and the right statements. They were working off of this site, rightstatements.org, which is really, really interesting. Rightstatements.org provides 12 standardized right statements specifically for online cultural heritage sites for us to work off of, because we do deal with so many weird variations of copyright. CTDA, for their purposes, decided to whittle these down to those 6 statements, figuring that would pretty much cover most of our needs. But this is a really interesting site to kind of go through and look at for your own information as well. And again, I'll put that link in the other page. Yeah, we have it down here, and I'll give you the link for that. And it gives you some kind of overview of what this is as well, like what their purpose is. And it kind of keeps streamlined for everybody, so everybody is all on the same page and not trying to do different things. I do want to talk a little bit too about, let me go back to the sandbox for a second. So, you know, we still have rights and restrictions up here, which are basically kind of a use statement. And this is where use statement is going to come in. That's a little bit different than saying a copyright statement or a rights statement. The use statement is more of what your institution determines as a group to allow people to do. For instance, Yale making everything from their archives, you know, free for use to the public, download right from their page, Smithsonian right from their page for educational purposes, all that. This is where something like that would go. So you could say, you know, this image is available free for everybody to use, download, whatever your, you know, fancy language is in here. Or if you want to say this image cannot be used without permission of the Foseum at, you know, Main Street in Anytown, USA, you must contact, you know, please contact us here at info@FoMuseum to obtain permission for use, or high resolution images or something like that. That's where you want to state all of that right there. So the rights holder, these might be titled something slightly different. If anyone's already got these fields filled in, we're going to have the tech folks kind of go through and check it. But for the most part, they'll still be applicable to what they're called now. We're just going to add another field with that drop-down list. As you know, since we obviously never all have time to go through and fill in all the fields and fully catalog everything, we're going to continue what we had previously done for the connector with CTDA. Our default went to copyright undetermined. And that's the way a lot of the default goes to if somebody's just putting records in. So when things get uploaded, it'll just go to that. So if you know something's in copyright, if you want to say something, or if you know it's in public domain, and that's fine, be sure to update that as you go in, but otherwise it'll default to copyright undetermined, and you can go from there. Just looking at my notes to make sure there's nothing much else. I mean, it's one of those, it's a really like straightforward topic until you really get into the nitty gritty of it and what the rights are and who you have to trace down and all that. So we are keeping this for our purposes on this very like upper level of reference. As I said, Connecticut Humanities is looking to do a little bit more with copyright. A few years ago, CTDA had Greg Cram from the New York Public Library come and speak at one of their open conference sessions. I think it was way back in like 2018 or something. And he handles copyright for New York Public. And it was fascinating. And he was one of the best speakers on copyright I've heard, because he broke it down in a very understandable way. And there were also a couple of things that I did not realize, that stuff like if you take a photograph of, you know, your coaster in your collection, you can't copyright that coaster because of it being an object. You can't copyright the fact that you took a picture of that coaster. It's a weird thing. And that's where I got very confused, because I always used to put copyright on all of my photography that I did for my old museum, just for the museum, not for me, but for the museum. But then I know that professional photographers will put copyright statements on their stuff. That's when it gets really odd, especially with objects, and especially why we're putting in some of this for stuff that we don't know, why we're putting in the copyright undetermined option. So I think that's, I mean, basically straightforward to what I wanted to talk about for this, just to let folks know that this will be changing. Tech is doing this in conjunction with our update to the portal that they're working on at the moment. They're going to be doing some test runs on this on Fairfield's instance, basically because I'm in contact with them all the time and I'm okay with them playing with my stuff on there rather than somebody else's. And it's easier to do it on a real instance versus just doing it in the sandbox. Once that's all set up and approved, they'll roll it out to everybody, probably in the spring. And I think we'll be doing another session or another copyright topic, and then we'll be talking with Connecticut Humanities to kind of coordinate with them a little bit and see if we can kind of work in conjunction on that for everybody. So that's kind of all I have for this. Does anybody have any questions at the moment? And if you don't have any questions about that, do you have any questions about anything else that we can help you with today?
I have like a question, being like a new person,
Mm-hmm.
Because we, as you know, have not gone live yet at the Glebe House. And I was wondering, is there a kind of like a standard of when we should go live? I had an intern, as you remember, who was doing all the media images and uploading them all for me, because I kind of taught her as I was learning, just step by step of what we could control instead of having her trying to do an entire entry with all the information. So especially since I don't have her all year, as she's a college student, so, I figured if she could get all the media images in there, then and the working titles, then I could go in as I have time over the winter now, because I'll be giving certain amount of time each week to the project, and I could go in and start entering all the information that's on the sheets into the proper areas. But as of right now, I think I only have like 2 or 3 items that I went through the entire thing to learn how to do the entire thing that are in there. So like, how many things should we have in there that are completed before we actually open it up, do you think?
First of all, you guys are at the top of the list for wanting to go live, because you said you wanted to before, and if you're iffy on that, let me know, but you're on the top of the list to be included on the portal, and it'll only be records that you've marked off, obviously. And I loved the fact that you had done putting all the media files and things up there and just working on that part of it, because that's such a huge part. It's very much an internal decision of how good a record is that you want it to be up online. I've had a range of that over the years. My last museum, when we started out and we were first able to put stuff on our site for the museum things, everything had to be at a certain level. We had grades from like skeletal record to a basic record to a curatorial record and all that. And it had to hit a certain level before we made it public. And it had to have a perfect image and all that. We very much realized after a grant period was over, we didn't have time to be able to do that, but we still wanted to get our stuff out online and accessible to the public. So we kind of updated that a little bit to just say, and I don't even remember if we had really specific factors to check off. I mean, there's some, I'm going to say basic things that you want to have in there if you can. The title, and a credit line of who gave it to you, kind of thing, just to kind of recognize the donor on that level. A date are some of the basic things, and a very basic description, just to tell you what it is. Even the description part can be a little sketchy. It depends on how findable you want to make things right away. It really varies based on what you feel you want to get out there. And speaking from a kind of a researcher point of view, I would go on to, when I was like trying to catalog my own collection, I would go onto the New York Historical Society's page, because they have very similar collections to my last museum and my current museum, actually. Very similar collections. So I would go on there all the time just to see what they had and if they had something similar. And even just for the fact of them having a really skeletal record very much helped me, just to see that it was a similar thing. To go on and look up, I can't think of any, like a piece of the Charter Oak, because believe it or not, they have pieces of the Charter Oak from Connecticut. So I would go on and look something up about the Charter Oak and look up what they were calling it, or if they had a similar type of item. And it was super helpful, even if they just had the title, a really, generic documentation snapshot, and maybe 1 or 2 lines of description. Super helpful. Dates were really helpful, if that's possible. So, it's the dream to have a really super full, complete, extensive record up. But, if you've got something that's really cool and you want to get it out there, you might as well just go ahead and put it out if you've got something. I do photography. I would love to have gorgeous, professional photography up for everything. But you don't always necessarily need to, as long as you can see something, because that's really valuable to other people. And I will use my example of showing my Fairfield page for a second. The eel trap that we have. It's really cool. I think it's really interesting. You can see this image pretty good. I literally took it while it was on the top of a ladder while I was standing on another ladder. So, it's not a professionally well-lit, gorgeous shot, but it's a good enough shot that you can get an idea what it is. So, it's stuff like that it's kind of an in-house decision. And kind of like I said, my last museum, they had to be very beautiful, professional, or if not professional, like professional setup style shots. And then I came to the point there before I came to Fairfield that I'm like, you know what, this works. And if it's not a gorgeous, beautiful photo, fine, it tells you what it is and gives you some information about it. So if someone's looking at baskets and I'm calling it an eel trap, and they look at it, go, oh, I have something just like that. Oh, it's an eel trap? Okay, awesome. So very much like an internal kind of decision. There's some things, this is my other go-to example, that this is where you may not want to make something public access. It helps if I hit the search button. I think I can usually find it going this way. I need to make like a little examples set so I can pull things up really quickly. So Fairfield has a lot of fans in their collection. We've not even cracked any of the boxes for any of these. And when I was starting to get this system up and going, I kind of did the same, like you were saying. I found a few caches of like photos, old photos of the system, and had really super helpful numbers like this. So I could match it up. It was fantastic. And I'm like, oh, look at this really super fuzzy purple feather fan. That's really interesting. I wonder what it looks like. And I blew the image up, and it's horrid because it's such a tiny, small, low quality image. And yeah, Lori, I could see you like, yeah, it's awful. But so this I probably wouldn't make public access because it's so bad. You're not really going to learn anything from it. But I am continuing to keep it as part of the record because I know what I'm looking for if I have to go pull it. So it's a really fine line between a useful image to somebody doing research and a really gross image that's going to help me find it at my museum versus find somebody online, have somebody online find it. I think this one's, yeah, that one's pretty bad too. And it's funnier, I can see the numbers from the little sign better in this little thumbnail than I can when I blow the image up. That one's not as bad. This one I would probably make public access because you can still see a decent amount about it because it's got, you can see the sequence and things on it. Does that help a little bit?
Yeah, it does. You know, I was kind of confused on like how much information would be in there before we went live, because a lot, Ben, I was thinking about it because a lot of our records, unfortunately, which don't have a lot of information at all. So
oh, yeah. You're not the only one.
Yeah, some of the things that I put in were newer things that were brought into the collection just recently because I was there and I was able to ask all the questions. Like, at it. Like, where did this come from? Was it yours? Was it your grandmother's? Yeah. Like, where was it before that? And, you know, ask all the pertinent questions instead of just someone dropped this thing off one day at the museum in the past and here it is. And they gave it a number and nobody knows where it came from.
You are not the only one that has that problem, my friend. We all do, because we all have those boxes of stuff that are just like, I have no idea. My museum did an inventory back in the 1980s, and everything that was in the inventory has an A number and it has a worksheet with it. Oh my God, that sounds awesome, right? There's so much stuff that just says like purse. It's got a lovely worksheet. Nothing's filled out. It says purse, you know, maybe one other bit of information. So yeah, we've all got that. I mean, one of the, I think the most important things in like trying to figure out what to get in there for a record, even if you can't go into great detail about the fact that your chair has, you know, straight back with split slat side rails or something like that, is just to get keywords in there. Like, is it an armchair? Is it a side chair? You know, stuff like that, and just put in keywords. I looked at some of our old, speaking of digital archive, we had put a lot of things up in one of the project instances a few years ago. And I went back and was looking at it, and I've got stuff like this, like beach scene. Okay, first of all, kind of not a beach scene. It's actually people like, I don't know why that doesn't show up. It's actually people like in a boat. Oh, not really a beach scene. People in a boat. There's a sailboat, which is a catboat in the background, something else behind that. So, you know, super interesting. And our description is, by the way, CTCo is updating their system and upgrading in like January. So their interface is going to be a little bit better. 3 in a boat. Mr. Glover, Annie B. Jennings, Mrs. Walter James. Kind of helpful. Not necessarily 100%, because I would rather have it be view from the beach of 3 people in a rowboat, you know, looking out towards Long Island Sound, boating, you know, 2 of the women are wearing hats. In the distance is a sailboat, you know, catboat style sailboat, you know, something like that. So you're going to get those keywords in there that if for some reason someone's looking for catboat, they'll pull it up and find this image, which is fantastic. So it's kind of all about getting a little bit more description in there to get those keywords in there to be able to find the stuff once it's there. So super happy they put who is in there. That's great. But just like 3 in a boat is really not descriptive. Plus a lot of the times now when they're trying to make things accessible to people, and I can't remember what the term is because I just saw it the other day. There's a little, you can do descriptor for images that's available on some websites that will usually have like a little button somewhere. So you'll be able to have more of a description of what that image is. And it's basically what we're kind of doing, you know, view from the shore of 3 people in a rowboat kind of thing that gives it more context than just saying whatever it is we say, 3 in a boat. So it's all about, for me, like getting those keywords in there. So you don't have to do that extensive, ridiculously long explanation or description. I mean, that description's awesome. Like for like the chair, and how it's made. And furniture researchers are going to be super happy if you had one of those super long descriptions, but other people who are just looking to see if your institution has armchairs with, woven rush seating, they just want to see your armchairs. So, and we did put at least topics, so boats and boating. I don't think we say that this is actually at Jennings Beach. I know it's at Jennings Beach. Mm-hmm. That doesn't help if somebody's looking for pictures nearby Jennings Beach in Fairfield. So hopefully that's helpful.
Thank you.
Yeah. I do want to do a little bit more of a cataloging workshop again at some point this year too. So we try to cover it a lot sometimes in some of the training sessions. So, but hopefully we'll do another session on that at some point this year.
So I have a kind of a related question.
Sure.
When we go live on the public portal, we're kind of leery of having stuff set up to say that it's going to be public before we go live. Does it make sense that we go live and then go into our records and say, yeah, put this one out there, put that one out there? Or should we have some set up so that when we go live, we instantly have 10 objects or 100 objects or something out there?
That's a really good workflow question of how you want to do that. As you're going through now, if you are seeing things that you're going to want to make live, I would go ahead and check it off and just say, accessible to the public. If you're, like there might be like a handful of stuff that you're like, oh yeah, this is one of our best records. This is one of our coolest objects. We're definitely going to want that out there. Go ahead and check it off now. It saves you some time later on. And I did some of that with Fairfield stuff. There were certain things that we had already knew were decent records, kind of like Lorianne's point of like, how good do the records have to be? There were a few things that we knew were really good records that were pretty full, that were like, this is easy, we're just going to put that out there. And other things that were like, well, we'll probably want it out there. I don't know if it's a useful enough record right now, so we'll watch it. For something like that, I would start like make a set of stuff to say like to be public or something like that, or check for public access, make whatever set you want to call it. And then as you're going, if there's questions about it, add it to the set. So when you're ready to go, you can pull up all of that stuff all together and kind of go through it a little bit more quickly than having to go through all however many hundred thousands of stuff in your collection, because that can be a slog and can be kind of slow going.
Yeah, it's not so much a question of whether or not we know some object is something we want public as just a little bit of lacking in confidence that we fully understand what we're doing, making something public. Just making sure that when we think we've checked the right boxes and the stuff we expect to be out there is out there. That was just really the gist of my question is, should we be careful and then jump in?
You can do searches on your own site to see what's marked as public and what's not, like within your own instance. So that'll give you a thing. If you're afraid something's marked public and you don't want it to be, you can give it a quick look and see. One thing I would do with the making stuff public or not, as you're adding images in media records, if you know that you want something to be public, go ahead and check it off then, because the media files, if you want those public, also have to be checked off as publicly accessible along with the record. So it's kind of a two thing. It's one of those, it's kind of a pain to have to check both of them off, but it gives you the option. For instance, if I wanted to put this purple fan record up, it's not a really extensive record, but it's there and maybe I want people to know about it. I will own, but I'm not crazy about putting those images up. I don't think this is public, which is a really good question. I can add this. Yeah, it's not accessible to the public, but say I wanted to make it accessible to the public, that's fine, but I don't want this image up. The image has to be publicly accessible as an aside. So now I know as I'm going through that when I'm adding media to records, if I know right off that like that eel basket one, I know that's a good image, I'm going to make that accessible to the public. Those media records will not show up without the whole overall record being accessible to the public. So if you're going on a digitization project or a photography project, you can check those off now and it kind of saves you a step down the road. I think I had, I'm in Fairfield and I'm in is me. So you're going to see more extensive stuff than you would necessarily just on like the sandbox or a regular one. Let's edit, enhance. Promise I can't remember the name of the set that I'm looking for. But we did have like a public access needs photo scans for that. We did have something set. So let me just pull up a random set. Because if you use the filter up here, refine results, you can check off statuses and access statuses. So all of these are not accessible to the public. So that's fine. You can do that with whether stuff has media or not as well. You need a bigger set to have that big 4 sets. Let me do all of this stuff. So 121 objects. Most of these have images. So I can go through on those and okay, so I've got 113 of those are not accessible to the public, but 8 items are accessible to the public. So you can kind of start with that too, as you're going through and be able to sort and filter things out to see what's on there or not. So if I wanted to go double check my accessible, I can click on that guy and go through those. And off the top of my head, I know that those are decent records and I do want all of those out there. So is that helpful?
Yes. Yep.
Awesome. Yeah, so it's kind of a mix of like a workflow, internal decisions, like I was saying to Lorianne about what you want public, what factors you want to make sure that something has before it's public, and a workflow thing. So all the above fun things when it's just easy to be like, we'll just put our stuff on the web. There's more questions, always more questions. And we will have on the copyright part of it, there will be a copyright line, like a use right statement on the record as well. So it will say when it shows up online that it's, you know, copyright undetermined, there will be a use statement with it. So added along with the copyright too, for people looking at stuff. So any other questions at that point today?
No.
Cool. I'm going to be working on looking at topics and a setup for next year, and hopefully have the list of dates and beginning of the year topics out in the next newsletter, kind of like I did last year. So it's probably going to be the same setup as this year, as far as being probably Mondays at 10 seem to work well. And will be recorded if anybody is looking at things afterwards, or I can send them back to that. I'm going to do a slightly different, I think, we may do kind of a series of things, more like a project workflow thing. And even like Lorianne was saying, like, how do I start doing my records? Okay, maybe you start with images. Maybe you just start putting images in and then kind of go from there. A side note to that part too, one of the things that I found really useful when we kind of did that in Fairfield, because we had a lot of those images, they're glass slides. We had a lot of those digitized and a few other things. And we had interns and volunteers attach them to the records, didn't do much else with them. I had a volunteer looking for something to do during COVID, and we were shut, nobody else was allowed in. Staff was eventually allowed in, but we still weren't having volunteers and things come back, and she still wanted to do some work. So it was really easy for me to just say, you know what, why don't you give better descriptions to these records? She can access it from home. All she needed to do was like look at the image and describe what was there. So doing something like that is really super handy and a good basic step to go with a lot of staff. It's a little bit more difficult when you're talking about stuff, like a spyglass or something like that. You can still kind of give it better descriptions, a little bit easier when you're talking about photographs or prints or drawings and things, but still something that you can work on from home, or like a volunteer or something. So they can add subject headings, anything like that is really handy once you've got that image up there to work with. So anyway, hopefully you're going to be doing that for next year, a little bit more, series of topics of workflows and projects and things like that. So I think we're good for today. So thank you, everybody. Enjoy your holidays. Enjoy the rest of your day. And we will see you next year.
Thank you.
Thank you.